So we're about a quarter to the hour here, and we want to turn back and talk a little bit about the jobs picture in this country for a moment. President Obama is going to be holding that jobs summit next week. He'll tackle the 10.2% unemployment rate in the country, or at least try to. A payroll tax credit, one of the options that is likely to be considered, but our next guest this morning does not think that that is the right answer. Dan Mitchell, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, joins us now from D.C. to talk about that. And this payroll tax credit has been thrown around, Dan. A lot of people talking about that as one of the things that may come out of the jobs summit. Why isn't it a good idea?
Well, it's certainly a better idea than another so-called stimulus where you just squander money on pork barrel spending. But here's the reality with a payroll tax credit. The overwhelming share of the money is going to be used by companies such as, say, fast food restaurants that have a high turnover anyhow. And not only that, you have an incentive then for companies to say, okay, we're going to fire someone and then hire them back the next day to get the credit. And then, of course, they'll put in the legislation rules to give the IRS more power to try to guard against that. I mean, it's not going to work. The only way that you create jobs is to make it profitable for companies to create jobs. And that means a smaller burden of government. And unfortunately, not only under this administration, but also under the last administration, we've had more government, more regulation, more spending, and now this administration wants to give us in the future more taxes, which of course is very much of a sword of Damocles hanging over the head of firms that are wondering whether to hire new workers. So I am not very optimistic.
I'd say the argument from those inside the administration would probably be that the role of government now is to step in and fill the gap until the private sector comes back, because they just don't think the demand is there yet, but they would argue that it will come back if you bridge that gap. You don't buy that argument, doesn't sound like. What's wrong with that?
Well, that's the old Keynesian theory that government comes in to sort of make up the difference when there's not so-called aggregate demand or consumer spending to keep the economy going. But that's putting the cart before the horse. It's sort of looking at what are consumers doing with their money. Well, before people can spend money, they have to earn money, which means they have to have jobs. There has to be production in the economy. And the problem is everything that's been coming out of Washington in recent years has been increasing the burden of government. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're getting European-style bad job numbers when we're following European-style welfare state policies.
We're looking at some of the items that are going to be on, the topics of discussion at this jobs forum, and creating green jobs and extending unemployment insurance and all these types of things. Anything that you think would be a positive that might come out of this, or no?
We've already seen from countries like Spain that the so-called green jobs is a mirage. They lost 2 jobs for every job they created in the so-called green industry. And again, here is the fundamental issue. How can anyone possibly think that making government bigger by giving Washington more power is going to be good news for our economy? I don't blame the administration for having a job summit. Republicans, Democrats, every White House does these kind of dog and pony shows to show that they care. What bothers me, though, is that Obama is repeating the mistakes of Bush by having government grow and grow and grow. He wants to have the government take over health care. How can anyone think that's going to be a positive sign for jobs, especially when it's going to mean higher payroll taxes?
Okay, Dan, so we're 10% unemployment now, 10.2. What's your fear, that we could go how high?
Well, I guess I have no reason to disagree with the consensus that we might go to 11 or even higher. That's a sort of a short-term prediction game. My greater concern is that in the long run, because we will come out of a recession sooner or later, in the long run, are we going to settle into a situation like you have in France and Germany with permanent 8 or 9% unemployment instead of going back down to 5 or 6% or even lower unemployment, which is normally what happens in America because our government isn't as much of a burden. But again, we're repeating Europe's mistakes. And if we repeat Europe's mistakes, we're going to get Europe's results.
All right. We thank you for your perspective. Dan Mitchell from the Cato Institute with us this morning from D.C. All right, let's get